The front door clicked shut with the sound of finality, echoing through the empty halls of the Carter mansion. David Carter, a billionaire known for his strict rules and quiet world, had returned home 3 days earlier than anyone expected. He wanted peace, but instead, he froze. From deep inside the house came a sound he hadn't heard in years. Something soft, something impossible, the laughter of children. His grip tightened on his suitcase handle as the noise grew louder, mixed with a woman's calm voice trying to hush them. Every muscle in his body tensed. No one was supposed to be here. No one ever dared to break his silence. He walked slowly down the marble hallway, the echo of his footsteps sounding heavier with each step. The laughter came again, innocent, warm, and out of place in a house built on order and fear. And in that moment, David knew something was terribly wrong inside his perfect home. The mansion felt different the moment David stepped in. Usually, the air was still, the walls too clean, the kind of silence money could buy. But now, there was life in it, sounds that didn't belong. He placed his suitcase down by the door, his jaw tightening as he listened again. It wasn't his imagination. There were voices, small ones, like whispers and giggles carried through the air. He loosened his tie slowly, his expression unreadable. After 20 years of living alone, David had grown used to silence. He had built this house to be his refuge, far from noise, far from people, far from anything that reminded him of the world outside. Yet now, as he stood still, he could feel his heart pushing against his chest, angry and confused. He began walking toward the sound, his polished shoes tapping against the marble floor. The further he went, the louder the laughter grew. He recognized the voice of his maid, Maria Lopez. She was supposed to be alone. She always worked quietly, never caused problems. But today, her voice sounded different, softer, desperate, like she was trying to keep something secret. David's hand brushed against the kitchen door, and for a moment, he just stood there, listening. He heard a child's giggle, then another, followed by Maria's gentle voice saying, "Shh, don't make too much noise, okay?" His chest tightened, his patience broke. He pushed the door open. The sight before him froze time. Under the bright kitchen lights, Maria stood with 2 little children clinging to her legs. Both were no more than 3 or 4 years old. One had a small toy car in his hand. The other held a piece of bread that had fallen on the floor. The scene looked simple, almost harmless, but to David, it was chaos. "Maria," he said slowly, his voice low and cold. "What is this?" Maria spun around, startled, her eyes wide in fear. "Mr. Carter," she breathed out, her hands trembling as she tried to pull the children behind her. "I didn't know you'd be home today." "That's clear," David replied sharply, stepping forward. His eyes darted to the children. "Who are they? And why are they in my house?" The little girl clung to Maria's dress, her face hidden. The boy stared at David curiously, too young to understand the tension filling the room. Maria swallowed hard, her voice shaking as she spoke. "They're my sister's children," she said softly, her eyes lowering. "She passed away 2 weeks ago, and their father left. My mother was taking care of them, but she collapsed 3 days ago. I didn't know where else to take them. I couldn't leave them alone." Her words came out like quiet confessions, but David's face showed no sympathy. His tone cut through her explanation. "You brought them here? To my home? Without permission?" Maria's shoulders tightened. "I had no choice, sir. I didn't mean to break the rules. I just needed somewhere safe for them for a few days." David let out a cold laugh, short and bitter. "You thought my mansion was a shelter?" Tears welled up in Maria's eyes, but she stood her ground. "No, sir. I thought it was a house where human hearts still exist." The words struck him harder than she intended. For a moment, his expression softened, then hardened again. "You're overstepping your place, Maria," he said firmly. "You work here. You don't make the rules." "I know, sir," she replied, her voice trembling but steady. "But sometimes rules can't feed a hungry child." The silence that followed felt heavy. David looked at the two children again, their innocent faces unaware of the storm around them. He turned away, running a hand through his hair, pacing the room. Every part of him wanted to shout, to remind her that he paid her to keep his house in order, not to turn it into a playground. But something in her eyes stopped him. For the first time, he saw fear mixed with love. Not the kind of fear that came from guilt, but the kind that came from someone trying to protect what little they had left. "Do you realize what you've done?" he asked quietly, facing her again. Maria nodded, tears falling down her cheeks. "Yes, sir. And if you want to fire me, I understand. But please, don't send them away. They've already lost everything." David felt something shift inside him. A strange ache spread through his chest, one he hadn't felt in years. Memories flashed his own childhood, a cold home where silence meant punishment, where crying was weakness. He blinked, forcing the memory away. "This isn't your home," he muttered, trying to sound firm, but his voice faltered slightly. "I built this house to keep peace, not noise." Maria's voice softened. "Maybe peace isn't silence, sir. Maybe peace is hearing laughter again." Her words hung in the air. David turned away, pretending not to hear them. He picked up his suitcase, placed it by the counter, and walked toward the window. The children had fallen quiet now, sensing the tension. The little boy clutched his toy tighter, watching him closely. David stared outside, his reflection merging with the faint outline of Maria and the children behind him. The mansion that once felt like protection suddenly felt empty, too big, too cold. Without turning, he said softly, "Take them to the guest room. For tonight only." Maria's breath caught. "Thank you, sir," she whispered, her voice breaking. David didn't reply. He stood still, staring into the dark glass, his face unreadable. Somewhere, deep inside, something had already begun to change. Windows of the Carter mansion. Sunlight poured into the kitchen, touching the silver handles, the marble counters, and the tiny crumbs Maria had missed while cleaning in the night. The children were asleep upstairs in the guest room, curled under a thick blanket that smelled faintly of lavender. Maria stood by the sink, her hands trembling as she washed the dishes. Her mind kept replaying David's words from last night. For tonight only. She knew what that meant. As soon as he woke up, everything would change. The sound of footsteps made her freeze. She turned and saw him, David Carter, dressed sharply in a black suit, his face unreadable. He carried a cup of coffee in one hand, his other hand tucked in his pocket. He didn't speak at first. He just watched her for a long moment, as though trying to understand the person standing before him. Maria swallowed hard. "Good morning, sir," she whispered. "Sit down," David said quietly. His tone wasn't harsh, but it wasn't kind either. Maria hesitated, wiping her hands on her apron before sitting at the edge of the table. She kept her eyes low, afraid to meet his. David leaned against the counter, sipping his coffee. The silence stretched between them, long and uncomfortable. Finally, he said, "I thought about what happened last night." Her heart pounded. "Yes, sir. I should have called security," he continued. "I should have reported this as a violation of trust. You know the rules here, Maria. No visitors, no exceptions." She nodded, her voice soft. "I understand. But I didn't," he said slowly, setting his cup down. "And that makes me wonder why." Maria lifted her eyes, confused. "Sir?" He looked at her closely, his face unreadable. "You broke my rules. Yet, I couldn't sleep last night. I kept thinking about what you said, about promises and children. Tell me, what kind of promise makes a person risk everything?" Maria's eyes filled with tears. "The kind made beside a dying bed," she said quietly. "When my sister was sick, she begged me not to let her children end up in a shelter. I said yes, even though I didn't know how. I thought I could handle it, but everything fell apart. My mother got weak, and I had nowhere to turn. David studied her face, his expression softening slightly. You could have asked for help. She shook her head. I didn't think someone like you would understand. Her words hung in the air. David didn't reply immediately. He looked down, tracing a finger along the edge of the counter. Someone like me, he repeated quietly. You mean rich, cold, untouchable. Maria didn't answer, but her silence was enough. He sighed, walking toward the window. You might be right, he said after a while. People like me forget what real problems look like. He paused, his voice lowering. When I was 10, my father used to say the same thing every morning, no noise in this house. I learned to be silent long before I learned to speak. Maria looked up at him, surprised. You grew up like that? He nodded faintly. Silence was the rule. My mother used to sit by the piano, but she stopped playing when my father said it distracted him. I guess I built this house to be just like his. Quiet, perfect, empty. The room went still. Maria could hear the ticking of the wall clock, slow and heavy. I'm sorry, she said softly. I didn't mean to bring back bad memories. David turned around, his eyes meeting hers. You didn't bring back bad memories, Maria. You showed me how wrong they were. Her breath caught. She didn't know what to say. He continued. When I heard those children laughing, I felt angry, yes, but I also felt something else. Something I haven't felt in years. Maybe I was angry because I didn't understand it. Maria wiped her tears quickly. Children don't understand rules, sir. They only understand love. David looked down, thinking about her words. You're right, he murmured. But love is not something I know how to give. Maria stood up slowly, her voice firm but gentle. Then maybe it's time to learn. He looked at her, caught off guard. Her words weren't bold. They were honest. They carried no pride, only quiet strength. David walked closer, stopping just a few feet away from her. You risked everything to keep your promise, he said. Most people wouldn't. Maria nodded. Maybe because most people never lose what really matters. He stared at her for a long moment, seeing not a maid, but a woman who had faced loss and still stood tall. Something deep inside him shifted again, quietly, almost painfully. Maria, he said slowly, I won't fire you. She blinked, unsure if she heard him right. Sir? You broke a rule, he said, his tone soft but steady, but not out of greed or disrespect. You did it out of love. I can't punish that. Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they weren't out of fear. Thank you, sir. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, David replied. But I need you to understand something. This house runs on order. If the children are to stay for a few days, we'll do it my way. No mess, no chaos. Understood. Maria nodded quickly. Yes, sir. Thank you, I promise they'll behave. He turned to leave, but stopped at the doorway. And Maria, he added quietly, tell your mother she'll get the care she needs. I'll make sure of it. Maria froze, her lips parting in disbelief. You'll help her? David gave a faint nod without turning around. I'll send a doctor this evening. It's the least I can do. When he left the kitchen, Maria covered her mouth with her hand. Her whole body shook with emotion. For days, she had carried fear, guilt, and exhaustion. Now, for the first time, she felt a strange warmth, hope. Upstairs, the children stirred awake. She rushed to them, smiling through tears as she whispered, It's okay now. We're safe for a little while. Downstairs, David sat alone in his office, staring at the photo on his desk, a picture of his parents standing stiffly beside him as a boy. No one was smiling. For years he had looked at that photo with pride, thinking it showed discipline and strength. But now, all he saw was emptiness. He leaned back in his chair, whispering to himself, maybe peace isn't silence after all. Days passed slowly in the Carter mansion. The air, once heavy and cold, now carried the soft hum of life. The sound of small footsteps echoed across the marble floors. Gentle laughter filled the hallways, and for the first time in years, David found himself listening rather than shutting it out. Each morning he woke up expecting irritation, yet instead he found curiosity. He would stand at the top of the staircase, watching Maria prepare breakfast as the children sat beside her, whispering, giggling, trying not to drop crumbs. Something about that small sight stirred something deep inside him, something he couldn't quite name. Maria, unaware that he often watched, worked quietly. She cleaned, cooked, and cared for the twins, her movements soft but steady. At night, when the house grew quiet again, she would sit by their bedside and hum a slow song her sister used to sing. Her voice carried warmth, the kind that made even silence feel gentle. One evening, David entered the kitchen without her noticing. She was kneeling beside the little boy, helping him tie his shoelaces. "Like this," she said softly, guiding his hands. The boy laughed when he got it wrong, and she smiled, patient as always. David stood there for a moment, frozen in the doorway. It had been years since he had seen such simplicity, such peace. The last time he remembered hearing laughter like that was when he was a boy himself, before his father's voice silenced the house. Maria looked up and startled when she saw him. "Mr. Carter," she said quickly, standing. "I didn't hear you come in." He shook his head lightly. "I didn't mean to interrupt." His voice came out softer than usual, almost unsure. She smiled politely. "It's fine, sir. We were just finishing up." He looked at the children, both staring at him with wide, curious eyes. "Are they adjusting well?" he asked. Maria nodded. "They're still a bit scared at night, but better. They think you're a giant." David blinked, then almost smiled. "A giant?" Maria giggled quietly. "Yes, sir. They said only a giant could own a house this big." He chuckled softly, the sound surprising even himself. "Well, then, tell them the giant isn't so bad once you get to know him." The boy grinned, hiding behind Maria's dress. The girl reached out her small hand, holding a cookie toward David. "Want one?" she asked in a shy voice. David knelt slowly, his eyes softening. "Thank you," he said, taking the cookie carefully as though it were made of glass. "It's perfect." Maria watched silently, her heart tightening. It was the first time she had seen him lower himself like that, not out of pride, but out of kindness. Later that evening, when the children were asleep, Maria found David sitting alone in his study. The fireplace burned quietly, throwing a soft glow on his face. Papers lay untouched on his desk, the light from his laptop dim. "Sir," she said gently from the doorway, "about what you did for my mother. She's already feeling better. The doctor said she just needs rest and food. Thank you for helping her." David turned, his expression calm. "It's nothing, Maria. Everyone deserves care." She shook her head. "It's not nothing. Most people wouldn't care. Especially someone like you." He gave a faint smile. "Someone like me? I mean," she said carefully, "someone who already has everything." He looked into the fire for a long moment before answering. "Having everything doesn't mean much if you don't know what to do with it." Her eyes softened. "You sound like a man who's finally learning what matters." He turned to face her fully, the warmth of the fire flickering across his features. "Maybe I am," he said quietly. "For years, I thought money and silence meant peace. But now, when the house is quiet, I find myself missing the sound of those children's laughter." Maria smiled faintly. "That's because silence can't feed the heart, sir. It only hides what it's missing." Her words lingered. David looked down, deep in thought. "You're wiser than you know, Maria." She laughed softly. "No, sir, I just live through what I can't avoid." A short silence fell, comfortable and calm. Then David spoke again, his tone thoughtful. "You know, when I first saw you here with those children, I thought you were breaking everything I built. But now I think maybe you were fixing something I didn't know was broken." Maria looked at him with quiet eyes. I wasn't trying to fix anything, sir. I just wanted to keep a promise. David nodded slowly. And that's what makes you different. You don't act out of pride or gain. You act out of love. She looked down, her voice low. Love can't build houses, but it can make one feel like home. Those words struck him deeply. He felt a lump rise in his throat but said nothing. Instead, he looked toward the dark window, his reflection barely visible beside the firelight. When I was young, he began quietly, I used to sit by the window and wait for my parents to come home. They never did on time. They always said business came first. I guess I became them without realizing it. Maria took a step closer, her voice gentle. It's never too late to be different. He turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting hers. Do you really believe that? Yes, she said softly. Change doesn't start with money or power. It starts when you stop hiding from what hurts. David nodded slowly. You sound like my conscience, Maria. Maybe I'm just saying what no one else will? He smiled faintly. That's what makes it worth hearing. The fire crackled softly between them, the silence no longer cold but peaceful. Before leaving, Maria looked back and said, Sir, if you ever need help remembering what peace feels like, just listen to them laugh. David sat alone long after she left, her words echoing in his mind. For the first time in years, he didn't feel lonely. He felt alive. When he finally rose to leave, he glanced at the family portrait of his parents above the fireplace. He took it down, placed it inside a drawer, and replaced it with a photo he had asked Maria to print that morning, a picture of her and the twins smiling on the kitchen floor, flour on their faces. He looked at it quietly, his lips forming a faint, peaceful smile. For once, silence in the mansion no longer meant emptiness. It meant rest. The morning light crept slowly through the tall curtains of the Carter mansion. The air felt soft and warm, carrying the quiet rhythm of a new beginning. David stood by the window of his study, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. Below, in the garden, he could see Maria with the children. The twins were chasing butterflies across the trimmed grass, their laughter bright, their joy pure. Maria stood nearby, her hair catching the sunlight, her eyes calm and kind. David had seen many things in his life, but nothing had ever looked as peaceful as that moment. For years, he had believed silence was his reward for success, but now he realized silence had been his prison. He placed the cup down, took a slow breath, and stepped out. The children spotted him first. The giant, the little boy shouted, running toward him with open arms. David smiled slightly and knelt, catching the child as he stumbled forward. The little girl hid behind Maria's leg, peeking shyly. Good morning, Maria said, her tone polite but warm. Good morning, David replied quietly. He looked at the children. I see you've taken over my garden. They're just playing, sir, Maria said quickly, worried she might have crossed another line. David shook his head lightly. No, it's fine. Gardens are meant for laughter, not just for looks. Maria smiled, a little relieved. For a few seconds, they stood in silence, watching the twins run around. Then David spoke again. Maria, when I first saw them here, I thought you had ruined my order. I didn't understand why you would take such a risk. But now, I think I do. Maria looked up, her eyes curious. And why do you think I did it, sir? Because you kept your word, he said softly. Even when the world gave you no reason to. Her eyes glistened. My sister trusted me with her last breath. I couldn't break that, sir. I couldn't live knowing I failed her. David nodded slowly. You didn't fail her. You did what most people wouldn't dare. You reminded me that not every rule deserves to be followed. Maria looked down, wiping a tear quickly. I never meant to cause trouble, sir. I only wanted to keep them safe. I know, David said. And you did more than that. You saved me from myself. She looked at him, confused. What do you mean? For years, I lived behind walls, he said, glancing at the mansion around them. Walls made of rules, silence, and pride. But you came in and showed me that peace isn't quiet, it's human. You brought life back here." Maria said nothing. Her lips trembled slightly, and she lowered her head. David took a deep breath and continued. "Your mother's treatment will continue, and I've spoken with the hospital. They'll make sure she gets everything she needs." Maria's eyes widened. "You did that for her?" "Yes," he replied. "She deserves comfort after all she's endured." Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "I don't know how to thank you." He shook his head. "You don't have to. Just keep being who you are." For a while, they stood there in quiet understanding, the wind moving softly around them. The children were now sitting under a tree, playing with small sticks, drawing lines in the dirt. David walked a little closer to Maria and said gently, "I've decided something." She looked up nervously. "What is it, sir?" "I want you to stay," he said. "Not just as an employee, but as someone this house needs. You and the children can live here. I'll make sure they have their own room, their own space. This mansion is too big for one man." Maria blinked in disbelief. "Live here? Sir, I can't accept that. You've done enough already." "You can, and you will," he said firmly, though his tone was kind. "You've earned more than wages, Maria. You've earned trust, and this house feels right again because of you." She hesitated, her emotions tangled between gratitude and humility. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," he replied with a small smile. "That's enough." Her lips curved softly, her voice trembling as she said, "Then yes, sir. Thank you." "Good," he said, exhaling. "Now maybe these walls can finally hold something real." Later that evening, the mansion looked different. The lights felt warmer, the air lighter. Maria prepared dinner while the children sat nearby, drawing with colored pencils David had bought for them earlier that day. David joined them at the table, something he had never done before. He watched the children laugh, watched Maria's calm face as she served the meal. He felt something settle inside him, something quiet but full. When dinner ended, the twins ran off to their room, their laughter echoing down the hall. David and Maria were left alone in the soft light of the dining room. "Sir," Maria said quietly, "can I ask you something?" He nodded. "Of course. Why didn't you fire me that first night?" David smiled faintly. "Because when I looked at you, I saw someone doing what I never had the courage to do. Choose love over rules." Her eyes filled again. "You did the right thing, sir. Not many people would." "I didn't do it for them," he said softly. "I did it because I needed to remember what it means to care." The words lingered in the air, heavy with truth. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, David walked through the halls of his mansion. The quiet no longer felt empty. He stopped by the guest room where the twins slept side by side, their faces peaceful, their tiny hands resting against each other. Maria sat beside them, asleep in a chair, her head tilted gently against the wall. He stood there for a long moment, just watching. Then he whispered to himself, "You've proven what true strength looks like, Maria. Not the kind that builds empires, but the kind that keeps promises." He covered her with a blanket before turning off the light. When he stepped outside onto the balcony, the night was calm. The city lights shimmered in the distance, but for once, he didn't feel drawn to them. He looked up at the stars, his heart quiet, his mind still. In that silence, he realized something simple but powerful. Wealth was never meant to build walls. It was meant to build bridges, to lift, to heal, to protect. He smiled softly, whispering to the wind, "Thank you, Maria." The mansion behind him glowed softly, no longer just a house, but a home. Dear viewers, this story reminds us that sometimes the people we overlook the most are the ones sent to teach us what love truly means. David Carter had all the wealth a man could dream of, yet he lived in silence, trapped by his own walls. It took a simple maid, Maria Lopez, to show him that peace doesn't come from control. It comes from compassion. Maria kept her promise when the world gave her no reason to, and because of that, 2 little children found safety, an old mother found healing, and a man who once lived alone found a new kind of family. Life has a strange way of testing what our hearts are made of. Sometimes it breaks our rules just to remind us that humanity is worth more than perfection. If this story touched your heart today, let it remind you to never judge someone's choices until you understand their pain. You never know how much courage it takes to do what's right. Dear viewers, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and share what lesson you learned from this story. Do you believe that compassion can change even the hardest heart? If you were moved by Maria's courage and David's transformation, please like this video, subscribe for more emotional stories, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter of love, humanity, and redemption. Because in a world full of power, it's kindness that still wins.